Big hits from each of the Mets' top four players, a good start by Tylor Megill, and another fantastic outing by the Mets bullpen. Could opening day have gone any better at Citi Field? I'll talk about that and more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, a season never really feels like it has completely started until the first home game of the schedule, and we got to watch that on Friday. All the festivities, the lineups being called, the fans packing the ballpark, and it could not have been a more perfect day. The buzz that was in the air, perfect weather for a baseball game, and I started getting chills, particularly once Carlos Mendoza ran out onto the field to a nice ovation, and then the starting lineup was announced for the New York Mets. Francisco Lindor comes out to MVP chants. The Citi Field crowd gets to greet Juan Soto for the first time. Pete Alonso is welcomed back home. And even seeing Brandon Nimmo get his giant ovation as the one guy that is the Met lifer who has never gone every single day of his career in a Mets uniform. Yes, the same thing is true about Pete Alonso, but with Nimmo, never got as close to being over in a Mets uniform as it did for Pete. But just seeing those four guys starting things off when the lineup was revealed and then throughout the game, it really did put into perspective how much the Mets have evolved, because you have the two homegrown guys who have reached pretty good heights in their careers that have been allowed to stay and went out to free agency as top free agents and came back. And then you have the two superstars that have been brought in for this next era of Mets baseball. It just feels like a team that is only going to get more and more fanfare, and a team that, 10, 15 years from now, we're going to look back on this group of Mets, and hopefully they've done some special things. But I think there's going to be a lot of love for what this group already has done and what they will hopefully continue to do over the next couple years, because it can be a lot of winning for the New York Mets. And then the game starts, and Tylor Megill, who, as I talked about in yesterday's show, very used to pitching a home opener. He went out and had a crisp 1-2-3 inning on 11 pitches, ended that first inning with a strikeout. That keeps the buzz in the ballpark, that keeps the vibes soaring high. Francisco Lindor steps into the box to My Girl as the crowd is still chanting and singing along. He takes the first pitch that he gets and rifles it to left center field. And right out of the box, you knew, oh man, Lindor is chugging for two. He's looking for a double on this one. The throw beat him to second base, but Lindor, great little swim move to avoid the tag from the guy that he was once traded for, Andres Jimenez. And although it was ruled an out in the field, Lindor ends up safe at second base. Then after Juan Soto pops out, Pete Alonso strides to the plate. And once again, Pete Alonso has some magic in that big right-handed bat. Falls behind the count 1-2. It's a good pitch by Kevin Gausman, a fastball low and away. That's a couple of baseballs off the plate. That's not an easy pitch to hit. Certainly not an easy pitch to hit out. And Pete Alonso, it didn't even seem like he needed a full swing to get that. It was almost a three-quarter swing, but the timing is right. He got it on the fat part of the bat, and he crushed it for a 2-run homer. And just like that, you're working with the 2-0 lead, for all of Tylor Megill's start. So really was just perfection from the introductions, the crowd. You get on the board early. Tylor Megill continues to pitch well. The Mets had Kevin Gausman, and I thought, man, Gausman's going to be out of this game early because he was up to 31 pitches through one inning. Brandon Nimmo, after Pete Alonso's homer, works a 12-pitch walk. Starling Marte works a full count. Nimmo stealing on the pitch, though, and then Marte hits a line drive double play. That really bailed Gausman out. And then you see, what a veteran pitcher like Gausman can do, because he settled in remarkably well retires the next 13 batters that he faced, ends up pitching into the 6th inning, and really kind of changed the complexion of a game that was going to be all Mets and ended up being all Mets, but it was closer than I think we were maybe expecting when the Mets jump out onto Gausman. You think, man, he might be out of this game in 2 innings, and it ends up being a much better start for Gausman than originally you would have thought. But on the other side of it, Tylor Megill, who I'm going to talk about more in the next segment, was outstanding, particularly through the first 5 innings. After getting a line out to start the 6th, he walks a couple of batters, and so he ends up getting the hook. But Reed Garrett comes on, and that was a real turning point in the game potentially for the Blue Jays, right? At that stage, they're still only trailing 2-0. 6th inning, couple runners on, a real chance to do something with the heart of their lineup up. Andres Gimenez, their cleanup hitter, going up against Garrett. And Reed Garrett calmly, coolly strikes out Gimenez, and Alejandro Kirk gets out of the jam. I talked about this going into the season, how Reed Garrett was a guy that I sort of envisioned being one that could come out and put out fires. And that's exactly the role that he's been in. A lot of times, the first guy out of the bullpen to relieve the starting pitcher when you typically get to the heart of the lineup the 3rd time through, and Garrett consistently coming through in those spots. He looks just as good as he did when he burst onto the scene around this time last year. So huge performance by him. Definitely have to shout him out. But then you have the Mets lineup, and they come through. Bottom of the 6th inning, Jose Siri gives one a ride. George Springer makes a nice catch going up against the wall. Francisco Lindor draws a 4-pitch walk that ends the day for Kevin Gausman. They grab a lefty to face Juan Soto, and Juan Soto gets a hanging sweeper, rips it into the right field corner to score Lindor with first base open. They, of course, intentionally walked Pete Alonso because of how red hot he is, and with the lefty on the mound, Brandon Nimmo comes up, first pitch swinging. He rips a double into the right field corner to score Soto, and just like that, it's 4-0 Mets. They go to the bullpen to get former Met Jacob Barnes, right on right against Starling Marte. He thought maybe the Mets might have countered with Jesse Winker. They did not. They trusted Marte to have a good at-bat there, and he does. Gets into a hitter's count and then drives one to center field. Actually hit the ball really hard. I think it was almost 110 miles per hour off the bat, but deep enough certainly to get Pete Alonso in from third, and Mets take a 5-0 lead, which ultimately ends up being the final score of the game. The only other time when the Blue Jays nearly put a run on the board is when Ernie Clement hit one down the left field line that I thought for sure as soon as it approached that foul pole, I was like, how did that get ruled a home run? It was clearly foul. Luckily, that's what replay review is there for. It gets overturned. So for a second, the Blue Jays get a couple runs on the board, but those go away, and you knew it was all Mets when A.J. Minter quickly strikes out Clement right after that. Ends up getting 3 strikeouts in a scoreless inning. And then Max Kranick, the Mets fan growing up who's now pitching for his hometown team in front of 11 members of his friends and family that were in the ballpark, has another great outing, 2 scoreless innings pitched. Only thing that he gave up was a base hit to Vladimir Guerrero Jr., retired the other 6 batters that he faced, and now so far this season, that hit to Vladdy is the only thing he has allowed. He's yet to walk a batter. He's gone 5 2/3 scoreless. His whip is 0.18, and of course, that ERA is spotless. So Kranick continues to be a great piece for the New York Mets. But overall, when you look at this game, you could not have written a better script. You get an early home run for Pete Alonso in his first at-bat back in Citi Field. Prior to that, of course, Lindor opening up the game for the Mets with the double. Megill having great stuff throughout the start that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. And then, of course, you get big hits from Soto and Nimmo. It shows you how potent and dangerous this lineup can be because they still haven't even gotten Mark Vientos going. They've gotten great contributions from Luis Torrens, but Francisco Alvarez is on the IL. Jeff McNeil's on the IL. This lineup is just scratching the surface. But what we are seeing is they obviously have all the potential in the world in that starting lineup, but they have a starting rotation that I think is already off to surprise some people, and a bullpen that is looking like a real backbone and strength of this team, and that could lead to a lot of wins moving forward. I want to talk about Megill, though, in the next segment because I thought he was outstanding. So I want to go through what worked so well against that Blue Jays lineup. We'll talk about it in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. When it comes to fueling your body, quality matters. That's why Just Ingredients is changing the game with clean, high-quality products designed to support better health and peak performance. Just Ingredients offers an NSF-certified line of protein powder, electrolytes, pre-workout, and creatine, all rigorously tested to ensure they're free from substances banned by major athletic organizations. Just Ingredients has also partnered with two-time MVP Bryce Harper, who trusts their NSF-certified sports line to fuel his training and recovery. And what I love about Just Ingredients is clean, transparent ingredients, wholesome, nourishing, without the artificial junk. Whether you're recovering after a workout or need an energy boost, their grass-fed whey protein and pre-workout deliver real results. Visit justingredients.us/Bryce Harper and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for 20% off your order. And for more wellness tips, follow at just.ingredients on Instagram. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Help us get to our next goal of 13,000 subscribers. Also, if you're liking the video, throw a like on it and leave a comment with your favorite moment from opening day. One of my favorite things about opening day at Citi Field for the New York Mets was Tylor Megill's performance. He was outstanding the first 5 innings of this start. He allowed just 2 hits and 1 walk. In that 6th inning, he did walk those 2 batters that led to his earlier exit than anticipated in that 6th inning. But before that, through the first 5 frames, it seemed like he had the Blue Jays right where he wanted them the entire time. He was in complete command of that lineup, and I thought he was going to get through 6 for sure. First inning, 1-2-3 frame, again, ends it with the strikeout, which was just such a good exclamation mark to add to a really good first inning. Second inning, gives up a 2-out triple to George Springer on a ball that Jose Siri probably tried to do a little bit too much, trying to dive for that he just couldn't get to. That allowed Springer to take the extra base and get to third. He then walks a batter. That was the 1 walk prior to the 6th inning. Runners at first and third, 2 out, tough spot, gets a pop-up to get out of that jam. Third inning gives up a 2-out single to Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Not much harm there. Gets Anthony Santander to pop up right after that. And then he retires 6 batters in a row in the 4th and the 5th inning. So 3 perfect innings, a couple innings, a little bit of traffic that he navigated. And then again, the 6th inning, he lost it a little bit, walked a couple batters and gets pulled. But overall, Tylor Megill really looks solid. And I think the thing that jumped out when you were watching that game was the curveball. And, there was some StatCast issues, it seems, because it certainly appeared like he was throwing a lot more than only 9 curveballs in this outing, and that's all that StatCast classified. I'm sure there was some sliders or some curveballs that were instead classified as sliders, but regardless of what pitch was what was clear is how well that breaking ball was working off his fastball. And anyone who's been listening to this show for a long time or has been following Tylor Megill's career has seen the progression and has known that the fastball has never been a question for Tylor Megill. Now, it's a pitch that it's gotten hit hard at times, but it's not due to the fastball itself. The reason that Tylor Megill got to the big leagues in 2021 is because he's 6'7". He gets over 7 feet of extension to home plate, and he throws a fastball that averages 95 plus miles per hour. That is the pitch that made him a big league starter. But trying to find the arsenal around his fastball has been a long journey and road for Tylor Megill. In the beginning of 2021, he was getting by with a slider and a changeup. It worked great until the league adjusted, and then the end of that 2021 season brought some struggles. 2022 gets off to a great start, then gets hurt, has struggles, and then it's been sort of up and down for him really ever since. But there's always been those flashes of, man, Tylor Megill, when he's right, can absolutely dominate a lineup, but it's trying to find what pitches can work with that fastball to really make a starting pitcher's arsenal. And what we saw in this outing was the ability to throw a curveball that tunnels well with that fastball. So that means that the hitter is seeing a pitch that's coming across the same plane as his fastball up in the zone, but then falls off the table and has that sharp bite to it. That's not something that he's had in the past, a really good curveball. And I talked about it going into the season throughout spring training, how last year Tylor Megill threw 8 different pitches. It was four-seam, cutter, slider, sinker, curveball, split, which was the Great American Forkball, the spork, sweeper, changeup. 8 pitches. And as I said in spring training, if you have 8 pitches, do you really have 4? And what I meant by that is if you have all these different pitches that you're throwing out there, do you really have an arsenal that's complementing your bread and butter, your four-seam fastball? Do you have the secondaries that you feel confident in going to at any count? Or are you just always trying to find something? Today I'm going to throw the cutter. And I'm going to throw the slider more. I'm going to throw the curve today. Today's a split day. We're going to throw a bunch of fork balls. You know what? Let's go sweeper today. Let's go change up. And you never quite have an arsenal that you can trust and that you really have the confidence in, because you don't have a great feel for any of the pitches outside of the fastball. I think a huge turning point for Megill is at the end of last season when he picked up the two-seam. Because if a guy is good at throwing fastballs, let's find other fastballs that he can throw. Let's find other pitches that are a little bit different, that break a little bit different horizontally. Let's give him another weapon, but it's still what feels comfortable and good coming out of his hands. It's just changing the grip. So I thought that was a huge thing that he picked up last year. And you see it in this start. You see him, facing a lefty and being able to start a two-seam inside that just bends right over the plate. That's such a weapon. I mean, you see, Sandy Alcantara doing that to the Mets in his start earlier this week with such, great effectiveness. I mean, that's as good of a two-seam as you're going to find in baseball. But that ability to, work in on a lefty with a two-seam, it's so valuable. And then you now also have this curveball that all of a sudden you can't throw against lefties. And that's always a question, like, what's he going to throw against a left-handed batter? Now that curveball, it seems to be a nice weapon that he can pair with his four-seam. The ability to go north to south with the fastball and the curveball, and then still be able to go east to west with the sinker, and then, pick your breaking ball. It seems like, the curveball works at times, but also a slider that goes more east to west. That gives him another variation of a breaking ball he can go to. We haven't seen the sweeper. We haven't seen the cutter. And last year, the cutter got hit really bad. 316 average against, 565 slugging percentage against. And it was his second most used offering. So far this year, we haven't seen a cutter. We haven't seen a splitter or the fork, whatever you want to call it. He hasn't gone to it. Now, last year, that pitch was really good to Tylor Megill, but maybe he's more comfortable throwing the changeup now. And I'm just happy that he's sticking to a more refined arsenal of 5 pitches. Through 2 starts, it has been 5 pitches that he's gone to. Four-seam, slider, sinker, changeup, curveball. Now, the one interesting element to, Tylor Megill and all the other pitches that he has, he might still throw in that wrinkle of the fork, at some point. But it's almost like the changeup so far. He hasn't gone to the changeup a bunch. If that's just a taste breaker, a change of pace, where it's just, I'm going to drop a fork ball because they haven't seen it in 3 starts, and I'm going to start throwing that. And that ability to maybe, toy with and change up the 4th and 5th pitch of your arsenal, that's all fine and well. But if he can really hone in on this curveball, and all of a sudden it's four-seam, two-seam, your sinker, and then that curveball, and those are 3 pitches that he can start using predominantly, I think it's just going to open up the world to Tylor Megill, where all of a sudden they can't sit on your heater and they're not comfortable at all. And, I think last year at times when the fork was maybe the one pitch that was working, batters could sort of, say, all right, anything that is starting low in the zone, I'm just going to abandon it. I'm not even going to swing because, there's a good chance that's the split and it's just going to drop off the table and it's going to be a ball. Now the ability to have the sinker that you can throw low in the zone, and hey, if they take it, it might just be a strike, or if they swing at it, you might get a ground ball. And then you still have, again, the ability to go north to south with the fastball and the curveball. I think there's an arsenal here where Tylor Megill may have finally turned the corner and can be a really good starting pitcher for the Mets this year. And there's a world where he never loses a rotation spot. I mean, we were talking about in spring training going in, you had 8 viable starting pitchers for maybe 6 spots, and he was the one guy that had the option. I guess him and David Peterson, but we all knew David Peterson, with what he did last year, had earned that rotation spot. Well, now Megill's starting to earn it, and I don't know how this picture ends up coming together when Minaya comes back, when Montas comes back, but the thing is, those guys at this point might not come back, or actually probably won't come back until June at the earliest. So a lot can happen until then. We don't know how Paul Blackburn's going to look when he comes back. We don't know how Clay Holmes is going to continue this transition as a starting pitcher. We don't know if Kodai Senga is going to stay on the mound, and how David Peterson and Griffin Canning are going to continue to progress. But Megill right now is throwing the ball as good as any starting pitcher in this rotation, and he very well could grab a spot in this rotation that he maybe doesn't relinquish, and all of a sudden next year, spring training, we're not talking about Megill as the 7th or 8th starter. We're talking about Tylor Megill, completely solidified as a middle of the rotation starter for the New York Mets. It looks really good. It's 2 starts. He's got to continue this, but it's been 2 very good starts for Tylor Megill, who was 2-0 to start the season and looking like a guy that has finally figured it out. So we'll see how that continues. Final segment, I want to preview game 2 of this series, and I'm also going to run through opening day for St. Lucie, Brooklyn, and Binghamton in the minor leagues. Just give you a couple of interesting notes on some of the top prospects in the Met system. We'll get to all that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. If you weren't there for the home opener, get out to the ballpark this weekend. There's nothing better than catching an MLB game live. The crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, the smell of ballpark food. If you're looking to go last minute, Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever because they have their last minute deals, all-in pricing, and lowest price guarantee. So Game Time will take the stress out of buying MLB tickets. Plus, ticket prices drop as game time gets closer, meaning you can score an incredible deal. I don't buy my tickets until I'm walking into the ballpark. I pull up in the app. I look at the seat map. I find my favorite deal, the one that looks the best to me, and I can find my tickets and buy them in a matter of 60 seconds. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Down the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB. That's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. If you want to be Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Game 2, Mets Blue Jays. It'll be a familiar face. Chris Bassitt going up against Griffin Canning, making his first start on the Citi Field mound as a member of the New York Mets. Bassitt, very familiar with this mound from his really good season in 2022, has had a lot of success against the Mets since. In 2023, he went 7 2/3 scoreless, allowed 4 hits, no walks, 8 strikeouts. Last year, another quality start, 6 innings pitched, allowed 1 run on 5 hits, 1 walk, 8 strikeouts. You look up and down the lineup, not a lot of guys who've had success against Chris Bassitt. Luis Torrens and Jesse Winker are each 2 for 4. Juan Soto, 2 for 9 with 2 walks. Francisco Lindor, 4 for 14 with 1 walk, 1 homer, 3 strikeouts. Pete Alonso, 0 for 5. Brett Beatty, 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts. Starling Marte, 1 for 8. Brandon Nimmo, 1 for 6. Jose Siri, 1 for 5 with that 1 hit being a homer. And Mark Vientos, 0 for 6 with 4 strikeouts. So I wonder if Vientos gets a day. Probably not. That would have the Mets starting both Brett Beatty and Luis Angel Acuna. Neither one of them is swinging the bat well. You might have been a little surprised when there's a righty on the mound and Acuna got the nod over Beatty against Kevin Gausman. I should have mentioned this on the show as I previewed the game for Friday's show yesterday. But Kevin Gausman has reverse splits. He's a guy that, his best pitch is his splitter, and a splitter is going to work really well against left-handed batters. So the Mets went with more of their right-handed lineup. That's why Jesse Winker wasn't in there. And that's why Brett Beatty wasn't in there. The Mets instead elected to start Marte at DH and Acuna at second base. I imagine with Bassitt on the mound, even though Beatty's 0 for 3 with a couple of strikeouts, they'll probably go back to Beatty. I would think Acuna didn't really have any great at-bats in this game on Friday, so I think they go back to Beatty. I'd imagine they go back to Winker. And I will say also, Bassitt started off his year pretty strong against the Orioles. He did give up 8 hits in 6 innings and walked 2, but somehow walked the tightrope and only gave up 1 run, struck out 7, and was up to 106 pitches in his season debut. A guy that is just as consummate of a professional and a veteran starter as you're going to find, that will start every 5th day for you and get over 100 pitches. I miss Chris Bassitt in the Mets uniform. He was really good in 2022. But going up against him will be Griffin Canning, who will get to make his introduction to the Mets faithful. Canning has some pretty good numbers against the Blue Jays, although limited sample sizes across the board. Only guys who have gotten more than 3 at-bats against him: Andres Gimenez, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., George Springer, and Anthony Santander. Gimenez 2 for 6. Vladdy's 1 for 6 with that 1 hit being a homer, also 3 strikeouts. Springer 1 for 7 with 2 walks and a strikeout. Anthony Santander 3 for 12 with a couple of doubles. Canning last year faced the Blue Jays and had a good start. 6 innings pitched, 2 hits, no walks, no runs, 6 strikeouts. So we'll see what Canning looks like in his second start. His first one was a good one against Houston. 5 2/3, allowed 2 runs on 4 hits. Remember, it was that double by Yordan Alvarez that ended up ending his day and out away from getting through that 6th inning. Probably a batter that he shouldn't have faced. But now there's no Yordan in this lineup to fear. Yordan had incredible numbers against Griffin Canning throughout his career. I think an OPS, if I remember correctly, over 1,700 with a pretty good sample size, as you know, Canning was in the same division with the Astros for some time. This is a team not as familiar with him, also not as familiar with him, and now all of a sudden throwing way more sliders. So we'll see what the pitch mix looks like for Griffin Canning against the Blue Jays and how he goes toe-to-toe with Chris Bassitt. When it comes to the Mets bullpen, pretty rested after Max Kranick was able to finish out that game. That allowed Edwin Diaz, Ryan Stanek, Huascar Brazaban, Jose Budo, and Danny Young to all get a second day of rest. So all of them should be good to go. So imagine if Canning is able to get through at least 5. You could always go to a Brazaban or a Budo to maybe get through those middle innings. If you need to put out a fire that Canning starts, you could always go to a Ryan Stanek, or you can save Stanek for an 8th inning to bridge the gap to Edwin Diaz. Danny Young, I guess, if you wanted to throw him in there against that left-handed part of the Blue Jays lineup with Santander and Andres Gimenez, you could always do that. Of course, I don't think a lot of Mets fans are going to be thrilled to see Danny Young with how he started off his season, but he is available. I'd also say Reed Garrett only threw 8 pitches today, so I'd imagine he'd be good to go as well. The only 2 pitchers that you would think aren't available, I don't know if AJ Minter is going to be throwing back-to-backs just yet, and Max Kranick, after throwing 30 pitches, will obviously need a day or 2. But the Mets bullpen is fairly rested. You have Canning, who looked good in his first start. We'll see how he does. And hopefully this Mets lineup can wear on Bassitt a little bit, get into that Blue Jays bullpen, and put out some more runs in front of your Citi Field Mets fans. Now let's quickly run through the minor leagues before I close out the show here. It was opening day for St. Lucie, for Brooklyn, for Binghamton. Not much to talk about in St. Lucie, but I did want to note that Drew Gilbert played a full game. So that was obviously a big question mark, as he did not start the season in Syracuse. Hopefully he gets there soon, because I have nothing to watch in that Syracuse Mets lineup right now. You got a lot of 4A guys and just no prospects to sink your teeth into outside of the pitching prospects, but on the hitting side, it's a pretty woeful lineup they have. So I hope they get Drew Gilbert up there soon. The fact that he played the whole game, he went 1 for 5 with a couple of strikeouts, but that is a very good sign that he was available and he played all 9. In Brooklyn, Carson Bench had a good start to his season. The Mets' top prospect, who was drafted in the first round this past year, got on base 4 times, 1 for 2 with a double, 3 walks. Jacob Reimer got his season off to a good start. Third base prospect that had a lost year last year due to, was it a wrist or a hammy? I think it was a hamstring injury for Reimer. But regardless, 2 for 5, 3 RBIs, drove in 2 runs with a single, and then drove in another late in the game with an RBI triple. So great game for Reimer. Christopher Suero got the nod as the Mets catcher for this one, while Ronald Hernandez went and played first base. Suero, really nice game, 2 for 4 with a home run. So solid game for him. I bet you they will sort of flip-flop those guys between first base and catcher to start the year with Suero and Hernandez. But good to see Suero getting his season off on a good note with his first homer. The Cyclones won 8-4. Dylan Lee had a good start. Dylan Lee, prospect that I talked about in yesterday's show as well. Guy that was drafted out of Georgia back in 2022. Hasn't pitched the last couple of years due to Tommy John. Threw 1 inning last year, pitched in the spring breakouts. So obviously the Mets are pretty high on him. 5 strong innings for Dylan Lee. Best start of the day went to Jack Wenninger in Double-A. 5 scoreless, allowed 2 hits, 2 walks, struck out 7. Really good outing for him. Nick LaRusso drove in 2 with a double. Alex Ramirez drove in 1 with a double. Ryan Clifford scored some runs after walking a couple times. Trey McLaughlin, a reliever of note, guy that had a great run last year in Double-A, is right back there. Definitely, one of the top relievers that you can talk about in this Mets farm system. He faced 5 batters, retired them all, and struck out 3. So good outing for him as the Binghamton Rumble Ponies won in their season debut. In Syracuse, the Mets got destroyed. And again, not a lot of guys to talk about. Sean Reed-Foley gave up some runs. Justin Hageman, I believe, got the start, got knocked around. And again, there's just nobody to talk about in that lineup, so we won't waste any time on the Joey Meneses and John Singletons of the world. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. I will have another show for you tomorrow, breaking down game 2 of this series and previewing what will lie ahead in the final game on Sunday. Also, just another reminder, there are postcasts that are going on the channel every single day after these games. Chris Schubert's doing a great job with those. So right after the game, they go live on YouTube. It's a 15-minute show. If you're curious about what's the postcast, what's the real show, the postcasts are always labeled postcasts. The thumbnails look different on YouTube, so you can always differentiate which shows are hosted by Chris and which shows are hosted by myself. I will go live after some of these games when Chris isn't available, and when I do, there won't be postcast in the title, so you'll know that I'm the one hosting those shows. And obviously, they're also going onto the podcast feed, and again, labeled postcast. So make sure you check Chris out, see what he's doing if you want that instant reaction after the game. Otherwise, you can always wait for me 6 o'clock in the morning every single day on YouTube and hit your podcast feed a little bit before that. As always, thank you all for listening and watching. If you want to subscribe on YouTube, do me that favor, hit that subscribe button. Help us get to 13,000 subscribers. If you're listening, follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now, if you're a second watch, head over to YouTube. Check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports today with our local host from each team, league-wide host from each league. By Locked On Sports today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.